I'm Anthony Gale, and you're listening to Rights and Wrongs, a weekly podcast by Human Rights Watch. Hong Kong was once heralded as a beacon of democracy in Asia. Now, it's an activist nightmare. Having come under China's control nearly 30 years ago, Hong Kong's autonomy has been slowly dismantled. Understandably, this has led to growing unrest. In 2019, we saw Hong Kong's largest ever pro-democracy rallies. More than 2 million people flooded the streets in demonstrations that lasted for months. China's response to these demonstrations was unflinching and brutal. The protests were violently put down, hundreds of people were arrested, and China introduced draconian new measures that made it easier to punish protesters. Now, facing the prospect of life in prison, many activists have fled. But despite leaving Hong Kong, they still face repression, harassment, even bogus arrest warrants. I'm joined today by Finn Lau, a key figure in the 2019 protest movement and a committed pro-democracy activist now based in London. Finn, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
3 weeks ago, Finn, you and 7 other activists were issued with new arrest warrants by the authorities. Why do you think the authorities continue to pursue pro-democracy activists, even when you're living in exile?
Well, the fundamental reason is that people is the majority, while dictatorship, especially China's Communist Party, is a minority. That's why they're afraid of people, especially those people who fight for freedom and democracy. They think that democracy is something that would topple the regime, instead of thinking it as a way to improve the society, improve the livelihood and well-being of the people. Yeah, so that is the fundamental reason.
What makes these arrest warrants unique is that they were also accompanied with a bounty, 1 million Hong Kong dollars. How does it feel to have a bounty on your head?
Well, the first feeling is that we couldn't even buy a toilet in Hong Kong with 1 million Hong Kong dollar. So that is the first reaction. I laughed about it because I don't know how many arrest warrants I have got already. So it was a long journey, to be honest, because for the very beginning, back in 2020, I got my first so-called arrest warrant under the same draconian NSL. And at that time, yes, I was very surprised. And I panicked a little bit and think about, well, how should I react? I was forced to expose my real identity and names at that time because of the warrant. But after 3 years of fighting, I think that I get used to this sort of transnational repression messages, this sort of risk, as well as those threatening messages or words from the head of the Hong Kong government. Johnny even said that, well, he would chase us until the end of the world. And this is totally ridiculous. But again, I think I have gone through this very steep learning curve and learned how to be resilient to tackle these sorts of transnational repression threatening messages.
You mentioned resilience in your answer. Is that something shared by other activists? Are you in touch with the other people that have received arrest warrants? And what has their response been?
Well, most of us, I would say, our attitude is that the marginal cost of getting a new arrest warrant is almost zero. Yeah, the only difference this time is that they are resorting to, explicit ways to encourage, to incentivize people to do their dirty works using illegal means, using means beyond the judiciary system, although it's already collapsed in Hong Kong, such a system. So, I would say there's a clear act of transnational repression. They are encouraging people to do that. And to be honest, I foresee that the risk of abduction and even physical harassment escalated because of the bounty.
You were actually attacked in 2019 whilst resident in the UK. Does this not amplify those concerns?
Yes. So back in 2020, 2 months before I got my first arrest warrant, I was ambushed. I was followed and ambushed by three suspicious people. They were well covered in face masks, hoodies. I couldn't see their faces. And at that time, I was having my daily walk near my house, my home, just 3 to 5 minutes away from my home. And then I got the habit of having a daily walk every day, maybe around 30 minutes, maybe 1 hour. And then I simply walk along the river. All of a sudden, I realized that there are three people who I never see them before. And then this seems to be following me. And then I tried to stop by a lamppost, but that was a serious mistake because once I stopped by the lamppost to observe them, they simply rushed to me and punched my right eye. I thought I lost my right eye immediately, so there is a scar here. And it was left by the broken bones in that incident. The whole of my face, the whole of my body was covered with blood coming out from my head. And so there was a moment that I was beaten to the floor, couldn't see anything. And I asked myself, is this the end of my life? At that particular moment, they keep going after my head, keep punching, keep kicking. And it was a very surreal experience. I would say it's a near-death experience. And then I would say it's a miracle for me to wake up, to stand up again on my own feet. I didn't see them running from me. I didn't see their back, so I don't know how long I have passed out. And I think they thought I was dead already. That's why they stopped attacking me. And then I tried to walk back to my house. I cleaned half of my face and realized that, wow, I'm not blinded. And I was so happy that I was not blinded. And then I took a clip and photo and sent them to my teammates. So that photos, that clip, they have been circulating on the internet or among different media outlets already. But then after my urgent call from my teammates, I felt that I was going to pass out again. I just realized that the back of my head was swelling. There is non-stop bleeding coming out from my eye. And I know that, well, I must call the 999 ambulance. And then the ambulance and the police rushed to my house and sent me to the hospital.
And what was the response from the police about the attack?
So it was quite disappointing that after 2 to 3 weeks, they simply called me without giving me a case number, saying that your case is closed. Yeah. So in my medical certificate, it lists that I have reported to the police. After all, the police rushed to my house and then took a few words, testimony, something like that. And then, so that's how they reacted. I even tried to reach the Home Office after the incident, but nothing coming back from the Home Office. And even up till today, I got nothing from Home Office despite the explicit bounty. And I think the Home Office is failing to do their job in terms of securing the freedom of speech, securing personal safety on British soil.
I'd just like to take a step back a moment and talk about the 2019 protests. Before the crackdowns, before the arrest warrants, before the bounties, you were actually, and I think this is fascinating, you were actually studying in London when the democracy rallies and protests broke out. I mean, what was it that made you feel that you had to be there?
I always got the urge to go back to Hong Kong. Even now, I want to take a flight, take a plane going back to Hong Kong. But then, so since June 2019, I was so desperate to go back to Hong Kong already. But there was some kind of serious, objection coming from my close circle of friends or other people. So that's why I only wait until late 2019 that I think, I could not wait any longer. Although there is a risk that I could immediately get arrested once I landed on the Hong Kong airport, but still I have to take that risk. I dare not to describe myself as one of the leaders. It's up to other people to judge whether I am. But I think I have to demonstrate. I have to show some kind of qualities such as willing to take risk during difficult times. That is how we set some kind of good examples in the fight for democracy. So that's why I went back to Hong Kong, facing all kind of tear gas canister, police brutality, rubber bullets, etc.
You were actually detained during the protest for 50 hours. Were you not worried for your safety at that point? And how was it that you were able to be released?
So the reason that they the so-called rationale that they used to arrest me and a few hundred others people, like 400 people on that night, is that they are accusing us for illegal or unauthorized assembly. And then they simply detained us for more than 50 hours at the Hong Kong police station under some inhumane conditions. For example, because it was winter time, and then they simply put us in a semi-outdoor car park. We need to sit on a plastic chair for 50 hours with a very thin blanket during winter time. We had to take off our personal clothing to replace with what they have been provided. They just treat us like prisoners. And whenever we want to go to the toilet or whatsoever, and we need to queue for at least 5 to 6 hours. For example, if you want to go to the toilet now, yes, 6 hours later, you could go there. Yeah, so that is how terrible the situation was. And whenever they call my name or my so-called ID number during the arrest, I thought maybe that is the call for me, and then to go to West Kowloon, and then got taken away, being disappeared and taken away to mainland China. Yeah, so I foresee that there is such a possibility. But, well, I was not panicking. I'm a rather calm person because when I was sitting at the police station, when I was handcuffed, I understand that there is nothing more I could do to affect the short-term outcome. Although I don't have any religious belief, but if I am destined to sacrifice myself, to lose my life because of my love for Hong Kong, then I would gladly accept it. So I would say that the whole police arrest incident is simply elevated my level of determination. Yeah, so sometimes there are so many things that you to control, and in that case, then you should not worry about it.
These were the biggest pro-democracy rallies in Hong Kong's history. Approximately 2 million people took to the streets. You were relatively young at the time. I believe you were 26. And something that struck me was just how many young people we saw at these rallies. What was it particularly about this moment that brought so many young people onto the streets?
Not just young people, but we got cross generations of support, ranging from kids, teenagers, 20s, 30s, 40s, or even up to 80s or 90s. So this is quite phenomenal in Hong Kong history. And we are also cross-sector. That means we got people from different walks of life, different industries to collaborate with each other. And I would say that was although it was the worst time, but also the best time in Hong Kong history. Yeah, so to me, the reason why I felt the urge to somehow to do advocacy or even propose to be the first one to propose sanctioning against Hong Kong senior officials is that, because I'm in Hong Kong. I was living in London at that time. I was standing outside the Chinese embassy and the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office. I was protesting alongside 2,000 to 3,000 Hong Kongers in London. But then, I think this is not enough. I could do much better, I think, yeah. So that's why when I was on my way home, then I keep thinking of ways to effectively pressure the Hong Kong authorities and the Chinese Communist Party, and taking away those Hong Kong senior officials like Carrie Lam and other people's foreign citizenships, like their British passport, as well as their foreign assets being hidden in Australia or Japan or other democratic countries, are some kind of good leverage, I would say.
You're listening to Rights and Wrongs, a weekly podcast by Human Rights Watch. I'm speaking with Finn Lau, one of 8 pro-democracy activists wanted by Beijing. Following on from these rallies, the authorities introduced draconian new laws, the National Security Law, that effectively strangles democratic protest. What do you think the impact of these new laws has been on activism in Hong Kong?
Within the country, so perhaps I may even talk about beyond the country a little bit as well. So inside Hong Kong, you could see that almost all civil society organizations have ceased operation or simply relocated to other places, including international NGOs like Amnesty International. So they used to use Hong Kong as a regional office, but then they had to close that regional headquarters as well. So it shows how voices are being stifled and how serious the situation is. We have lost the top three independent Hong Kong media outlets in Hong Kong. So Apple Daily, Stand News, Citizen News. But then, well, right now we have only maybe very small scale Hong Kong media like Hong Kong Free Press keep running. But we know, well, from my understanding, it's just a matter of time that all the, non-pro-Beijing medias or non-Beijing controlled medias got shut down. Yeah, so that is the situation. On the other hand, of course, because of the COVID and NSL regulation, these sorts of things, it is almost difficult, if not possible, to protest on the street of Hong Kong. So we are in the stage of waiting for another opportunity. Perhaps if there is another chance for another 1 million uprising, then we could better prepare for it. Yeah, so that is the situation inside Hong Kong. We got lots of political prisoners, political trials going on, and the total length of imprisonment up till today is more than 1,000 years. We got more than 10,000 Hong Kong people got arrested. On the other hand, we also got the data should be over 700 years of total length of imprisonment, and then over 1,000 political prisoners in Hong Kong right now. So these figures actually is even more astonishing, more severe than Iran.
With the introduction of the national security law, as well as the overwhelming scrutiny of people in Hong Kong through cyber surveillance and a number of other measures, I mean, how difficult must it be for protesters to mobilize? I mean, do you think we will see similar protests to what we saw in 2019 ever again?
Well, it's always hard to say whether there will be another large-scale protest. Personally, I hope that will happen, and I trust Hong Kongers is very resilient. When we look back to history, say in 2003, we got 500,000 people protesting against the Article 23, which is equivalent to national security law, almost equivalent. And then next time we got lots of people protesting against the national education reform in Hong Kong back in 2012. That is when Joseph Wong arose as a political activist. And then 2 years later, 2014, we got umbrella movement. We got millions of people going to Admiralty, going to Mong Kok, and many different places of Hong Kong to protest. And then in 2016, there are some kind of uprising in minor scale. And then in 2019, we had the more than 6 month protest in Hong Kong. So when you look at the frequency, we get more and more protests from time to time. Although the draconian NSL is quite powerful in the sense that it's quite ambiguous, there are so many red lines. That's why it's quite effective in creating white terror. But I would say never. Never would say never. After all, if there may be a chance that there may be large-scale discontent, domestic discontent inside China, perhaps maybe Tibetan Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, and Chinese dissidents, we will come together. We will have our own uprising in our own places.
I think it's very interesting that you mention other groups, because obviously being based in London and the nature of our work is we meet with a lot of different groups who are standing up to the Chinese authorities. Do you think there are opportunities for protesters and activists from Hong Kong to work with other groups, perhaps from mainland China, in standing up to the Chinese authorities?
Yes, I believe that kind of alliance, while the Chinese Communist Party is creating their United Front, why don't we create our so-called United Front of democracy, something like that, against the Chinese Communist Party? And well, for example, I was one of those quite proactive to collaborate with Tibetans and Uyghurs for the last few years since I go fully public, where we co-organize different kinds of rallies to call for the diplomatic boycotting of the Beijing Olympics, and we succeeded. So that is some kind of possibility that we could create together. On the other hand, I organized the first ever UK-Hong Kong summit in March this year, alongside different other cities and other organizations. It was a success because over 99% of those Hong Kong participants, they are quite satisfied with the summit. And there was a session we dedicated for Tibetans and Uyghurs to share their experience, no matter whether it is their culture, history, or their political struggle inside their homeland and outside their homelands. And it's quite inspiring.
I'd like to just go back very quickly to the bounty. Do you think the fact that China is now issuing bounties, is that a sign of their increasing desperation because of the groundswell of protest, or is it a sign that they're getting bolder?
The bounty has shows that or indicate that they are getting bolder and more willing to go beyond the judicial system to get their dirty works done. Because the bounty, this explicit bounty, simply incentivize more people to do their works on their behalf using illegal means. And that's why I got a screenshot from my friends, a Hong Kong friend, and he somehow joined a Chinese Telegram group. And in that Telegram group, there was a message saying that perhaps we should use some kind of tactics to lure them, and then we could catch them or kill them. So that is some kind of measures that has been emerging for the last few weeks.
It's really difficult for me to wrap my head around what it must be like to have the weight of a regime harassing you and intimidating you. How does that harassment manifest in your daily life? What does it look like?
Yeah, so I got so many different kinds of harassment. They are quite creative and diversified. First of all, in terms of physical incidents, when I collaborate with the Tibetan and Uyghurs to host the rally that I've mentioned just now, we opposed the Beijing Olympics, and then we invited 3 parliamentarians in the UK to join us as a keynote speaker. And then during that rally, there was a guy who pretended to be the city officer. He pretended to be coming from the Westminster City Council. We refused to believe him, and that guy asked us to provide our passport and other identity document to him. And then, we tried to drive him away, and then he tried to stick around. And even after the rally, he tried to follow one of the MPs. We report that case to the council. We report that case to the MET. At that time, the MET simply closed the case 2 to 3 weeks later, while the city council they told us that they would never send any officers to rallies like this, and our rally was very peaceful.
So who do you think it was? Could it be an innocent bystander, or is it perhaps something more sinister?
I don't think it's a bystander. If that's simply a bystander, he would not be so keen to see our passport. Yeah, so if I'm interested in some to look at some other rallies from other minorities, I would simply stand there. I would not request them to provide their passport. So this is totally ridiculous. So I would say, because of logical deduction, it's highly likely the Chinese Communist Party.
And has there been any follow-up or support from the government?
Unfortunately, there's no follow-up by the government because the MET, as I've just said, they simply closed the case 2 to 3 weeks later. Their awareness is still quite low. On the other hand, yeah, we really couldn't do much. On the other hand, so I got a parliamentary briefing a few days after I got the bounty, right? And then it was hosted by Bob City MP, and there was another Hong Kong activist with me as well at that time. And then during that panel or this briefing, I talk about the incident, I talk about the implication, etc. And then there was a guy, a Chinese guy, who claimed to be lost. Suddenly tried to intrude or break into our room. He claimed he was lost. And one of the most ridiculous thing is that that committee room was one of those most obscure or remote committee rooms at the UK Parliament. How come he would get lost and then go up one stairs to one floor to another room? So this is totally unreasonable. I was told by the key host after the panel, so I didn't see that guy's face, but that shows how bold the Chinese Communist Party is willing to go.
I read earlier that James Cleverly suspended his visit that was supposed to be happening, I believe, later this month. Do you think the UK, Australia, the US are perhaps being a little bit naive when it comes to understanding the threat posed by China? And what lessons should they take from what has happened in Hong Kong?
Yes, I would say Australia is setting a good example to the rest of the world. After all, Australia is one of the Five Eyes alliance country that got seriously bullied or coerced by the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah, their wine export and other things got severely affected 1 to 2 years ago because of their strong support towards democracy. But in the end, they absorbed that economic shock and proved that it's better to diversify markets, resorting to global markets rather than a single gigantic assertive trading partner. And I would say this is good for the rest of the world. Yeah, and on the other hand, in the case of the UK, I would say maybe that bounty is a way to test the bottom line of the UK government and the US government. Because, for example, the UK government, so in the very beginning, we heard that James Cleverly would visit China by the end of this month. And they are seeing that, we haven't, so the background is that the UK cabinet, they haven't sent any minister to China for years, and James Cleverly would be the first one. So I think they think that there's a good timing to push the bottom line. On the other hand, in the case of US, there will be a conference called APEC, and it's an international conference in which Hong Kong typically would got invited to attend. But the most ironic part is that Johnny, who is the head of the Hong Kong government, has been sanctioned by the US government since 2020. So if they simply waive the sanction against Johnny and let him in, then it will be a mockery towards human rights and democracy, as well as the system of the US government. It will prove that the sanction regime is simply a useless tool or instrument to hold China accountable, to hold Hong Kong accountable. Yeah, so this is a good timing to test such a thing.
I'd like to end on a positive. I mean, speaking to you, you strike me as an incredibly resilient, incredibly committed person. What is it that gives you hope for the future and the future of Hong Kong?
History gives me hope of future, because if you take a time machine going back to 1960s, telling people maybe in Berlin, maybe in the Baltic states, Estonia, etc., saying that the USSR would collapse suddenly, the Berlin Wall would be gone overnight, they would say you are crazy. But in the end, we know the history because the world adopted the correct joint strategy to contain USSR, to contain the dictatorship, to fight against the dictatorship. That's why it collapsed. So I think history will repeat if we could choose the right path, choose the right responses to dictators and autocratic party like the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, that's certainly something positive to end on. Finn, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time out. I know you're incredibly busy at conferences and a number of other engagements, but it's been a fascinating conversation, and I hope we get to do it again.
Yeah, thank you. I could do more if you want in the future.
You've been listening to Rights and Wrongs, a new podcast by Human Rights Watch. Our producer today was Christina Varganova. Our engineer was Kosi Ogbully. I'm Anthony Gale. In next week's episode of Rights and Wrongs, we'll be talking about Myanmar. I hope you'll join us then. Thank you.